In my experience, everyone will say they want to discover the truth, right up until they realize that the truth will rob them of their deepest held ideas, beliefs, hopes, and dreams. The freedom of enlightenment means much more than the experience of love and peace. It means discovering a truth that will turn your view of life and self upside down. For one who is truly ready, this will be unimaginably liberating. But for one who is still clinging in any way, this will be extremely challenging indeed. How does one know if they are ready? One is ready when they are willing to be absolutely consumed, when they are willing to be fuel for a fire without end. History is a pack of lies about events that never happened, told by people who weren't there. The revelation of the once great civilization of Tartaria and possibly other civilizations that came before that has been a huge red pill for a lot of people, and a lot of people have really gotten on board with it. Now, evidence of what we're calling the mud flood has been found all over the world. It's been found across Europe, it's been found across England, in the United States, it's even been found here in Australia. The only thing that's really been a question of it is, when did it happen? Some people have suggested it happened in the 1600s, and some people have suggested that it occurred in the 1800s. But there is, of course, a possibility that it occurred twice, possibly both in the 1600s and the 1800s. Something else we've identified is the existence of a worldwide root language, which was Magyar. This language was prevalent here in Australia. It was also spoken by the tribes in the Melanesian and Polynesian areas and by the Incas. There's also talk of a Hungarian man who was able to understand the Aboriginal languages in northern Canada as well, and another one in northern Russia. So this shows that this language, Magyar, essentially the root language of Hungarian, was very likely the worldwide root language that existed before the previous cataclysm, either the one in the 1800s or the one in the 1600s, or perhaps even before that time. Like I said, we don't really know how many of these events have occurred. And that's one of the big problems with looking at all of this stuff, is we can only really trace it back so far because the history is so convoluted. I mean, it's convoluted anyway, but once we get back to pre-1600s, we really don't know what we're dealing with, simply because so much of it has been fabricated and so much has been moved around. Places have been moved around, histories have been moved around, things have been changed. One of the most interesting things that we find is how the maps have changed over the years. You know, maps that show lands that are no longer there, maps that depict land at the North Pole, maps that show the island of Friesland being quite a large island with many major cities and villages and mountain ranges and rivers and local smaller islands and all sorts of stuff that was apparently located just southwest of Iceland. This is depicted on many, many maps. That is now gone. An interesting thing about that as well is that there is now a section of Holland that is called Friesland. Obviously not the same place, but it does bear the same name. We have maps that depict California as an island. We have maps that show quite a large inland lake called Lake Connobus, which you can see depicted on maps in southwestern North America. A lake that was no longer there. An interesting thing is that early maps of North America do not show the Great Lakes as well. And very interestingly, they depict Chicago, which is actually on the shores of the Great Lakes, but they don't show the Great Lakes. It's like the lakes weren't there. Chicago was there, but the lake that it sits on the edge of was not depicted on the map. And the maps are quite detailed. Why would a cartographer not include something as large as the largest lake system in the world if he were making a map? I mean, you know, you'd think he would notice this sort of body of water sitting there. So why isn't it depicted on the early maps? It's not on maps around the 1500s. It's not until the mid-1600s that we actually find the Great Lakes depicted on maps of North America, and it would appear that prior to that time, they simply weren't there. Interesting. The existence of the orphan trains, the enormous amount of children who were being trafficked not only around Europe but also around the entire world around circa 1880 in the latter half of the 19th century. Around 635,000 children trafficked across Europe, 200,000 children per annum sent from east to west across the United States, 100,000 children sent out to Australia, sent out to New Zealand, sent out to Africa. And the distinct possibility that these children were sent out to clean up after the mud flood, after whatever had happened, the cataclysm, whatever it was that caused this great destruction across the earth. These children were sent out to clean up and to repopulate the world. An interesting thing as well, when you look at some of the convict prisons here in Australia, such as the Port Arthur prison, you notice the cells are extremely small. So you've got to wonder who the convicts were, the so-called convicts who were sent out here. Was it really convicts, or was it actually children that were sent out and kept in these enclosures and then put to work during the daytime? When these children would have grown up and had children of their own, then of course these children could have been taught any history you wanted to teach them. The original children that arrived in these places wouldn't even have been interested in history because they would have been too concerned with day-to-day survival in the conditions they would have been forced to endure to even have any concern about history at all. They'd be too young to even be worrying about it. They wouldn't be concerned with how they got there. They'd simply be concerned with getting through each day. So it's another really interesting point to consider. But there is every indication that many of these places were actually civilized, and what we were seeing wasn't really a colonization of new lands, it was a cleanup after the devastation that occurred to the previous civilization that existed in all of these places. And again, this appears to have been a worldwide culture, a worldwide civilization that we're calling Tartaria for want of a better name. I mean, Tartaria is certainly the name of the place, the civilization, the culture that existed in Europe, and it certainly seems to have been connected to North America, South America, the Philippines and Australia and other places as well, possibly even Japan. But we don't know if Tartaria was the entire civilization. It's simply the biggest area, and it's one word that we have to go on. So we need to be a little bit clear in what we're presenting here. But the fact of the matter is that there is every indication there was a previous civilization, a very advanced civilization that once existed on this earth. And there is every indication that this previous civilization was destroyed by some type of cataclysm. There are many people that are calling this a reset and saying that what we're seeing here is a deliberate reset of civilization. You know, as I've often said, ladies and gentlemen, all the world is a stage, and there is so much going on this earth that we are unaware of. And even when we attempt to find the truth, it's very difficult to find because all of the information we've got has been constructed and falsified and put there to lead us generally in the wrong direction. And it's not until you're prepared to start thinking right outside the box that you can begin to see a little of what's actually going on here. And that's why it's so important not to get stuck into belief systems along the way as well. I mean, consider everything, but believe nothing, because once you adopt a belief system, then all the information that comes to you is going to be judged in accordance with that belief system. And stuff that doesn't fit in with your belief system, you may disregard and you may discard. And it may well be important information which will one day lead us to the truth. So all things have to be considered, but I find all of this sort of stuff fascinating. You know, really, when you just look at what the maps say and you look at what the reports from the times say, and you look at what the evidence that is lying all over the world says on its own. I mean, the stone monuments that are left as relics of this past civilization really do speak volumes. They speak in a very, very loud voice if people just have the right type of ears to hear and the right type of eyes to see what they're actually looking at. You know, you do this and you approach it from the right angle and approach it with a very open mind, and the picture begins to paint itself and the truth begins to rear its head and show itself to you. It's just, as I said, it depends on how far you're prepared to think outside of the box, because there's a lot more going on here than what people would ever consider to be true. But the fact of the matter is that when you really start looking at this stuff, you begin to see that many of the old stories of myths and legends and stuff that we would deem to be fantasy may not be quite as fantastic as we think, and may actually have its basis in reality and in some very real history that has been very well hidden from us. The truth seems to be pretty subjective depending on what people want to believe. Anyway, the truth movement, in inverted commas, which I believe shouldn't really have even been named the truth movement, it should more be a freedom movement, because that's what all this is about. That's what this has always been about, is establishing the freedom we need to discover what the truth is. Because until that time, you can believe anything you want to believe. It doesn't make any of it true, because all the information has been put there to lead us down whatever rabbit hole resonates with you. And that's really what it comes down to, folks. It's what resonates with you. It's not what's true at all. It's what you choose to believe. And that's the situation that we're up against, because, the real truth, what is the real truth? There must be some real ultimate truth, but nobody knows what it is. And until people are prepared to admit that, we're never going to get anywhere, until people are prepared to put their beliefs down and just look at things and let the path unfold before you as it will, without choosing to believe anything. Then we're never going to get anywhere. Once people are prepared to do that and prepared to respect the people around them, then we may actually begin to make some sort of a difference. Because the lack of respect for people around us, the lack of respect for people who think differently to anybody with a belief system, is one of the things that is used to keep us so under control. This has been the big obstacle that the so-called truth movement, the resistance, the freedom movement, whatever we can call it, has faced since day one, is that people will go down rabbit holes, they'll adopt belief systems, and then they'll think that anybody who doesn't support their belief system is the enemy. This is one of the biggest tools that has been used against us, and it has become so prevalent in the resistance over the last 4 or 5 years, and it is simply the biggest obstacle we face to ever establishing freedom. There's just too many belief systems getting in the way, and really we've got to put it all down, because we're never going to find out what the truth is until we're prepared to look at everybody and look at everything and consider everything but believe nothing.